and talk to us about pesticides. And, all this stuff is in our environment, and we need to be aware of what it's doing, not only to birds, because birds are our bioindicators. There he is. There's Hardy. Hardy, I'll tell you about him first. He's the director of the American Bird Conservancy's Pesticides and Birds campaign. So he is our man on the front line advocating for policy solutions to bird toxicity. That's kind of hard to say. He has BS in zoology from Ohio State and a Master of Public Administration from Kent State. He lives in, I love this one. This is great. He lives in Columbus, Ohio with his wife, his pets, and too many houseplants. He's a hiker, a native plant gardener, a birder, and a kayaker. He sounds like our kind of people. And we'd love to have him come down here to Texas sometime and talk to us in person. So he kind of goes between Ohio and Washington, D.C., where he's working on the policies. So he's going to tell us about the synthetic pesticides that we've all heard about. They're ubiquitous. We've heard about them all. They're in our crops, they're in our nursery plants, they're on our lawns. And the amounts are staggering when you read the statistics. And many of them are problematic for birds, as you might. If they're designed to kill things, birds are alive, and we don't want them to kill the birds. So Hardy's going to give us some information about the chemistry behind these common pesticides, what makes them so harmful, the ways they're used, the various ways they can impact birds, and how to reduce our dependence on them. Our meaning the big capital O-U-R in a society. So I love this statement, and it just says it all. From our backyards to the halls of power, we can all take action to understand and reduce the negative impacts of pesticides on birds. Heavy on the take action. So that's what we're going to hear from tonight. So Hardy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. Are you able to hear me? Can I get a wave from somebody?
You hear him?
Can you
We're
hear
going to
me?
hear you in just a minute. Just a second.
No problem.
Okay. I forgot to mention he has a great voice.
And a face for radio, I assure you.
Good line. Good line.
Thank
Okay.
you. All right, sounds like y'all can hear me. Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to your group tonight. I would love to take you up on your offer of coming down to Texas and birding there. I've been fortunate enough to visit the San Antonio area, but it was for work at my last job and it didn't leave a lot of time for getting out and exploring the nature. So yeah, definitely going to come take you up on it. And also, I got to tell you, I appreciate that on your free night in the evening, you're going to come hear about microplastics and complicated pesticide policy. Bird people are special people, y'all. We are a different kind, and I love it. So grateful to be with you this evening. And we will go ahead and get started. So yeah, I'm Hardy Kern, the Director of Government Relations for American Bird Conservancy's Pesticides and Birds campaign, a title which I assure you is much fancier sounding than what the job actually is, but I'm excited to tell you about it tonight. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about myself and how I got into this role. I started out as a kid that always loved wildlife, just like the fantastic student who talked before. By the way, I feel terrible calling her a student because she's 10 times smarter than I'll ever be. So thank you for all your amazing work on microplastics. I have a colleague who's going to be thrilled to hear about it. But like she was saying, you saw a bird fly out of the nest and it really sparked something for you. I had similar experiences when I was a kid, but I started out looking less at our native wildlife and I was much more into exotic wildlife. I actually spent the first 10 years of my career as a zookeeper, but I always found myself sort of gravitating towards native wildlife, especially native raptors. So this was a non-releasable rehabilitated black vulture named Ronaldo that I got to care for a very long time. And then after, like I said, about 10 years of that, I happened into a job at American Bird Conservancy where my contact with birds went a little bit further away from directly hanging out with them to Zoom backgrounds and then going to Washington, D.C. to talk about birds to people and the policies that can help them, doing events like this. But two things. One, I missed being outside, I missed being around wildlife. And two, I had a lot of shorts and pants with waistlines that for some reason all seemed to shrink at the same time when I switched over to a desk job. So I started volunteering in my local community here in Columbus, and I'm so excited to hear about y'all's Lights Out. I'm a Lights Out Columbus volunteer. It's one of our bags in the top right. And then in the bottom right, that's me and my best friend, Chase the turkey vulture. So that's a little bit about me and kind of how I got into this role at American Bird Conservancy. Wildlife's always played a huge part in my life. And if you haven't heard of ABC, no problem at all. We take bold actions for birds across the Americas. And what I like about ABC, other than, they sign my paychecks and I can pay my mortgage, that's great, is the way that we organize our priorities. So we actually have this pyramid that you can see on the right. And this is our version of a mission statement or a strategic plan. At the top of the pyramid, the thing that we are most concerned about are preventing bird extinction. So we do work with some of the most critically endangered birds in North and South America, birds in Hawaii, birds in the southeastern United States, birds right here in Texas as well. Down one rung, we have reversing bird population declines. So if a species isn't necessarily threatened or endangered, but we see a downward trend in their population, we want to start addressing that. Number three is reducing threats to all birds, which is ambitious, but we like to work on it. And then the bottom of the pyramid is not the least important, it is the most foundational, which is why we have it there. And it's building the bird conservation movement. It's making birding accessible. It's making sure that conservation is something everyone can access. And groups like their Audubon Society and My Columbus Audubon Society, American Bird Conservancy, the weird neighbor you have that always watches the woodpeckers, whoever it might be, are all part of the bird conservation movement. So I'm thrilled to be here with y'all tonight. And where I sit is right here in this reducing threats to all birds segments. That's where our policy and threats team lives. So I work on issues that are a little bit harder to measure in acres or population numbers. I work primarily on pesticide policy and the Endangered Species Act. Looking back at your past presenters, my good friend and colleague Grant Sizemore has presented to y'all about outdoor cats. We have folks that work on window collisions. We have a gentleman whose whole job it is just to, try to convince wind companies to move their offshore wind somewhere else. He's been down through the Gulf all over the place. So, really excited to be here tonight. And now getting sort of more into the meat of what I wanted to talk about. I'm going to show y'all a little animation that I know is going to be familiar. And this is a heat map of barn swallows and how they move throughout the United States in Central and South America. And as the color gets warmer, so more towards yellow, or rather more towards purple as it gets cooler, that's when the populations are really starting to get large. And here's why I love showing this. We think of barn swallows as kind of a common bird. I live in Ohio. They're pretty, run of the mill here in the summer. And when we talk about birds migrating, folks tend to think of it as the birds are somewhere warm and sunny that I don't know anything about. And then one day they show up and they make babies and then they hightail it to go right back to wherever they were before. But as you can see from this map, what's really well illustrated is that migration is something that happens in a way almost all year long. They're constantly moving around to different parts of the country. They're constantly, seeking out different places where they can look for food and mates, and they disperse all throughout Central and South America in the case of barn swallows. The other reason I want to show this is not only to make a point about how complicated migration can be, but also to show that birds are harder to conserve than a lot of other species because they're everywhere. They're great because they're everywhere and we can all see them, but it gets a little bit difficult because we can't just say, they're only in this one single forest or there's this one single issue that's affecting them. There's a lot of things that factor into bird conservation, frankly, because they move around so much and they have such varied life cycles. And you've probably seen the results from the 3 billion birds report that was released in 2019, which is that we have lost about 3 billion birds since 1970. The group of birds, when you talk about kind of big swaths of taxonomy that were hardest hit, were aerial insectivores. So birds that fly around like our barn swallows and eat stuff that was up in the sky. And we've seen about a 32% population loss in those aerial insectivores. And there's a lot of reasons that contribute to bird declines, everything from habitat loss to climate change to outdoor predators and things like that. But pesticides play a really big part. And when I was thinking about how to formulate our talk for this evening, there's a thousand different directions I could have gone down, but I thought what would be most apt is to talk about the three largest, most common different types of pesticides that we tend to interact with as homeowners, as nature enthusiasts, as master naturalists, and maybe even in our jobs, and how they work, how they might impact birds, and what we can do to curb their use a little bit. So to get real basic, because I'll be honest, I didn't even know this when I started this job, I want to start with what is a pesticide. When we hear pesticide, we almost always jump to insect killing things, so insecticides. However, the way that the federal government defines it under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, if for anybody who loves an acronym, it's a terrible acronym. A pesticide is anything that prevents, destroys, repels, or mitigates a pest. That includes herbicides, rodenticides, and fungicides, but it also includes things like citronella candles. It includes things like biopesticides. It includes things like strains of bacteria that are used to degrade insect colonies out in the wild, especially in agricultural areas. So pesticide is a really broad term. And when we start to run the numbers and figure out exactly how many birds are impacted from pesticides every year, the best numbers that we come up with are somewhere between 67 and 72 million birds per year are killed from direct pesticide exposure. That means they got sprayed with it, they ate it, or in the case of raptors, they ate something else that ate that pesticide. This is a big number, but if you know any of the other statistics around bird loss, it pales in comparison to window collisions, outdoor cats, things like that. But the thing that I really want to point out with all of our estimates is that it only accounts for direct exposure. And there's a lot of other things that go into it. So unfortunately, I can't see everybody in the audience. So, just play this game with a neighbor. I want y'all to guess what percent of all terrestrial birds in North America eat insects, because this blew my mind. What percent of North American terrestrial birds eat insects? 96%. 96% of land birds in North America eat insects at some point in their life. The finches that are grabbing seeds off the coneflowers and sunflowers, they eat bugs in the spring and in the fall. The hummingbirds that come to your nectar feeders and are sucking nectar out of flowers, they feed their babies primarily spiders and mites and other really small insects. Even the birds that we don't think of as insectivorous at some point are usually eating bugs or feeding bugs to their babies during their life cycle. And Doug Tallamy, the master gardener, and Greg Schreiber, fantastic researcher, they took that 3 billion bird data, the data that said that, we've lost 32% of aerial insectivores, and they broke it out by what all the different birds examined eat. And when you look at it, to the first speaker's point about wetland birds going up, some piscivorous fish-eating birds increasing, birds to whom insects are essential are the ones that are in decline. The birds to whom bugs are important, I'm sure, as part of a food web, but maybe aren't a primary food source, are the ones that are actually seeing population stability or increases. So the best predictor of bird declines is actually whether or not insects are important to them. Here's another fun quiz for you. How many caterpillars will a single Carolina chickadee feed its nestlings before they fledge? This is one nest and one single Carolina chickadees, which are small birds. 6 to 9,000 caterpillars. for one nest of one bit of teeny tiny Carolina chickadees. They've run these experiments out in the wild and found that when baby chickadees don't get enough caterpillars in their diet, they not only will have smaller clutches, they see increased nestling mortality, fewer offspring that wind up fledging, lower body mass of the ones that do make it out of the nest. It's a bummer, but it's just my way to say it is really important that there are enough insects out in the environment. And the reason why I come back to this, the reason why I'm hitting this so hard, is because when we talk about bird declines from pesticides, it's much more than them being directly exposed, being sprayed, eating it, having it get on their feet or their feathers. It's all of these other smaller interactions throughout their life cycle that pesticides drive that we don't necessarily think about. So pesticide use can drive habitat loss, usually from herbicide drift or from lower insect biomass, meaning that there's fewer pollinators to make sure there's enough leafy places, vegetated places for birds to go. There's acute exposure that leads to lethality, so when they're directly ingesting it. But the big one for birds is prey loss, when there's not enough insects in the environment to support their life cycle. That is a huge direct impact from pesticides that's not captured in those top line mortality numbers. There's also acute exposure that leads to sublethality. What happens if a bird is exposed to a chemical but doesn't necessarily die from that single exposure? What if there are other impacts like the loss of the ability to navigate, weight loss, if there's organ function decreases? What happens then? And then the other one is, what about chronic exposure? What about birds that are exposed to a very small amount of chemical very consistently throughout their lives, throughout their early years? And the true answer is we don't exactly know what that does for birds yet, but there are some ongoing studies. The simplest way to put it is fewer bugs means less food for birds. When there are fewer bugs to eat, birds will turn to less than optimal diets, things like seeds, especially agricultural seeds, which may themselves have chemicals on them. We'll get to that in a minute. They'll have to fly further away to forage, which means that they're expending more energy, which means that they might not make as many trips back to the nest, so fewer babies might survive that way. And when they're out and about, that flying further away from the nest, it increases their odds of being predated upon, especially for small songbirds, from both native predators like hawks and from introduced predators like outdoor cats. So now we're going to break it up. If you're not having fun yet, wait till we get into insecticides. I promise it gets happy by the end. I promise you it does. So we'll start off with insecticides, the chemicals, the repellents, the mitigators that are meant to impact bugs, arthropods. There are three basic types of insecticides, and they are grouped in how they are applied, how they are making their way into the systems where we want them to kill bugs. There are systemic insecticides, which are actually grown into plant tissue. They're typically applied to soil, to plant roots, to the outside of a seed, and then as the plant develops, they bring the toxins up and they're grown into their tissues so that as a mite or an aphid or something comes trucking along, they take a bite out of the stem or out of the leaf, it's already got the poison in it and they die from ingesting the plant. So with systemics, the plant itself becomes the pesticide. There are contact insecticides, which are meant to be applied directly to the bugs in question, to the pests in question. These are the ones we most typically think about: aerial sprays, ground sprays, a can of Raid that you might have in your garage, something like that. And then there are ingested insecticides, things that are put out as tiny little bits of bait that are meant for bugs to come along and eat them and then die after that. And one specific type of insecticide that I'm sure you're hearing about a lot, it's the bulk of my work, are neonicotinoid insecticides. If you look at this and are like, what the heck kind of word is that? I promise you, I've gotten way better at Scrabble since I started this job just because of all the chemical names. So we'll break it down. It just means new nicotine-like chemical. Neo is new, nicotinoid is nicotine-like. So it's a new class of chemical that works in the same way that nicotine does. They're called neonics for short. The way that they basically work is in your nerves, or in an insect's nerves, I should say, and then vertebrates as well. You have little receptors that are called nicotinic acetylcholine esterase receptors, which are meant to be opened so that a nicotinic acetylcholine esterase inhibitor can then come and park in them. Basically, it's your way of turning on and off your nerves depending on what you need to happen in that particular moment. So you can think of the receptor kind of like a drawbridge. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down when it's functioning normally. When the neonic gets in there, it actually fools your nerve into thinking that the hormone that's supposed to be sitting in there is parked. So rather than the drawbridge being able to go up and down, the neonic constantly locks it in one position, which means that if you need the drawbridge to go up so a boat can get through, it might be locked in the down position, which will start to cause chaos, or it could be locked in the up position, which means the traffic won't be able to go through. If you're a bug, this translates as your nerves just fire continuously until you eventually convulse and die. If you're a bird, unfortunately, the same exact thing can sometimes happen. And the fancy, funny looking words on the right here are the 5 different neonics that are registered in the United States for various uses. The most common ones are the top 3: imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, and clothianidin. Also, don't worry about writing these down. I will make all the slides available afterwards for anyone who's interested. And these can be used as insect sprays. We use them in flea and tick collars for our pets. They are used for trunk injections, typically in production orchards or production forests, like those that are grown for timber. And then we also will use them a lot in agriculture, particularly on seeds. The number one use of neonicotinoids in the United States is as a seed coating. And these dangerous looking Skittles up on the top right are different types of agricultural seed that already have the neonic on the outside. Neonics are systemic, which means that they grow up into all parts of a plant's tissue when they work like they're supposed to, but they're also really, really water soluble, which means that if they get wet, the chemical is designed to slough off so that the plant can suck it up. But it also means that they travel really well in flooded farm fields. They travel really well in wet soil. And so the cartoon diagram down on the bottom shows what happens when a seed is planted with a neonic. What'll typically happen is about 1% of that chemical will be lost as dust, so it'll dust off into the environment. About 5% actually makes it into the plant that it's intended for, and the other 94% hangs out in the soil where it'll persist for up to 3 years. It gets into the waterways by traveling through wet ground, or it can also come off with surface water as it moves across it. Neonics are so deadly that one single corn seed that has a neonic coating on it, like these dangerous looking seeds, these dangerous Skittles up here, one single seed has enough active ingredient to kill a songbird if they ingest it, something the size of a cardinal or a pyrrhuxia. And one single seed is toxic enough to kill 80,000 bees. 80,000 bees from just one single seed is possible. So when you have a chemical that is applied on the outside of a seed, and that is the most used insecticide in the entire country, we built the best mass delivery system for them possible. About 99% of corn grown in the US is grown from a neonic coated seed. Somewhere between 50 and 75% of soybeans have it. It's on wheat, it's on oats. Not to mention that after it's on the seeds, we also spray it over the top. And as it dissipates out into the environment, we start to see impacts on wildlife because it's really good at doing its job. It's really good at locking those receptors into place, which means it's going to keep doing that even if it leaves the cornfield where it's supposed to be. And when it gets into birds, it can cause everything from weight loss to decreased brood sizes to loss of navigation. It kills the bugs that the birds are supposed to be eating. All of these different impacts stemming from these same chemicals. So now that we're having a lot of fun, we're going to move into the second large class, which is herbicides. Herbicides are any type of chemical that is meant to kill plants. And there are a ton of different types of herbicides. There are herbicides which are broad spectrum, which means any plant that they come into contact with, they are going to kill. There are some that are selective, which means you can spray a patch of grass that has dandelions and chickweed and fescue in it, and it's only going to kill the dandelion and the chickweed that's in there. There are some that are pre-emergent, which means you spray it on the ground before the plants come up and it kills them. There are post-emergent herbicides that you use after the leaves and the flowers have already sprung up. There are some that are just meant for flowering plants, some that are just meant for shrubby plants, you name it. Herbicides have a ton of different modes of action. In all the testing that happens with herbicides, both the herbicides that we put into our farm fields and the herbicides that we use at home, they do check for impacts on birds. They do the same with insecticides, with fungicides, with rodenticides, and their whole goal is to figure out how much can an organism be exposed to before we start to see impacts, before they start to die. For birds with insecticides like neonics, it takes very little, like we said, a single seed. However, with herbicides, because a bird's anatomy is very different from a plant, we typically don't see a ton of direct impacts from herbicides on birds. If you don't go spray a bird with an herbicide, that's a bad idea. It's going to ruin, their whole day, your whole day, everybody's day. But if you did, other than it being uncomfortable, it probably wouldn't be lethal. However, that doesn't mean that they're not impacting birds. If you talk to the federal EPA, if you look at a lot of Texas state law, everything is written to say herbicides can be used without having any impact on birds, on avian wildlife, on mammals. However, the few studies that have been done have looked at other ways, less direct ways that herbicides might impact birds. For instance, there was one that looked at this was done all the way back in 2000, and they found that when herbicides were used in a particular area that was next to typical bird breeding habitat, so this was a forest that was next to a soybean farm, more herbicide use meant that there was less habitat. The leaves might not have developed well, there might have been less undergrowth. And when there's less habitat, there was less breeding over two different breeding years, which meant that there were fewer birds in the population. So herbicides, less habitat, less bird breeding. Another one that was done looked at the impact of non-crop plants next to and in agricultural fields. And when the herbicides were used, they were killing everything that wasn't corn in this particular case. And it was leading to fewer insects in the area. And if you take nothing else away from my talk, birds need bugs. That's important. So when there were fewer non-crop plants, fewer native plants, there were fewer bugs, which led to fewer birds. Here's a kind of a weird one, but I thought this was very interesting, especially for maybe not anyone in this room. I don't want to point any fingers, but we all have, you know, brothers-in-law and neighbors and, parents that just don't want to shift their thinking. The people that run outside the second that a dandelion pops its head up in the springtime, the second that we see that single spindly, craggly leaf, they go out and they immediately want to start spraying that or the plantain or what have you. When it's been examined, what happens when you go out and you spray weeds very early? Fewer weeds led to fewer seeds from the weeds, whatever you call a weed, which meant less food for early migrant birds. The birds that are coming when it's still a little chilly, at least in Ohio, it gets really chilly. There's not bugs that have emerged yet. So they are relying on seeds from those early emerging in the season plants to sustain themselves. And when you're going out and spraying herbicides and killing those early emerging plants that are seeding early in the season, that leaves less left over for birds. And then this one's a real journey. So, put on your traveling pants and stay with me here. There was a study that was done. This was in Europe, but it has been replicated in smaller instances in North and Central America. And it found that there was herbicide use that led to native plant depletion, that led to native insect depletion, which meant that when there were fewer bugs to eat, birds turned to suboptimal food sources. So there weren't enough bugs to feed their babies, so they were feeding their babies, seeds and I don't know, Cheetos and Arby's or whatever. And then that led to fewer babies after that. So that one's a real big journey, but you can see there's all these cascading effects from herbicide. A lot of us might not use herbicides at home, but a lot of us live out in the country. We live next to farm fields. I wanted to show these because if you've ever had home vegetable crops, if you ever had a tree in your yard or your apartment complex, and you've noticed some strange curling, typically 3 or 4 days after the farm next door has just sprayed their crops, it's probably from drift of two very well used herbicides, which are dicamba and 2,4-D. These are the active ingredients. And this is what we typically see, leaves that start to curl up from the outside and will eventually die. The Audubon Society I'm on the board of here in Columbus, we manage a 20-acre preserve that's surrounded by fields, and without fail every single year, even though we're out there hand pulling honeysuckle and stuff, some of the native hickory trees and the maples that we have, right when the farmers go out and start spraying, we'll see the leaves start to curl up. And then in the bottom right, these are actually cypress trees out on a lake in Tennessee where they started to see needles dying off from the herbicides getting picked up by the wind, drifting out over the water and killing the plants that way. All right, last class of super fun pesticides before we get to the happy stuff, which are rodenticides, so chemicals that are meant to kill rodents. And we might use these indoors, you might use these outdoors of your home, your town might use them, your work might use them. Don't get me wrong, my message on any pesticide is never going to be never use it ever, because human health can be directly impacted from plants, from rodents, from insects. And so we need to keep that at the forefront of why we're using pesticides. But it also doesn't mean that we need to immediately reach for chemicals all the time. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm not saying that you should live your life, swimming in a pool of rats or make friends with every mosquito you meet. I'm just saying there's other ways to think about it. So with rodenticides, there are two basic classes. There are anticoagulant rodenticides, chemicals meant to stop blood from coagulating. And then there are just kind of the other methods. There are actually only 11 rodenticide active ingredients in the United States that are registered. There are close to 12,000 herbicide and insecticide active ingredients, and there's only 11 rodenticides. There are two different types of anticoagulant. First generation, which was sort of the first group of chemicals that were developed, and a mouse or a rat would have to go eat poisoned bait, but they would need to eat 3 or 4 times from the same bait station before they would get exposed to them. And then people were like, well, that's taken too long. I want need these mice and rats to die right away. So they came up with what are called the second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or SCARs. These were designed so that if you eat them just one time, that has enough poison in it to kill the mouse or the rat. Unfortunately, because they are so highly toxic in very small amounts, we started to see a lot of impacts on people, on wildlife, on pets, especially raptors and children, unfortunately, are the ones that really fell victim to the SCARs. So in Texas, you cannot buy them at your hardware store, the second generations. You can get the first generations, but not the second. You have to be a licensed applicator to access those. And then for the other methods, there are different neurotoxins. There's one, zinc phosphide, which when a rodent eats it, it turns into phosphine gas in their stomach and poisons them from the inside out. And then there's another one, cholecalciferol, which will actually cause a big buildup of calcium in the rodent. Now, the reason why I point all this out is because what eats rodents? Raptors and scavengers, and believe it or not, cute little woodpeckers sometimes will as well. And so what we see happening typically with birds is they look for the easiest prey to consume. They want the slower mouse, the rat that isn't, able to walk in a straight line, the one that looks like it's just left the bar. They want the rabbit that is acting a little woozy because they're easier to catch. And especially if you're an owl with a nest of chicks, if you are a Swainson's hawk, if you're a black vulture, something doing nuptial gifts, or if you're just a woodpecker on a bender, you're going to go for the easier to eat rodents, which are typically the ones that have poison in them already. And I'm so jealous that y'all have karakeras there as well, and that your society had the author of what was it, a Most Remarkable Creature, the book about karakeras. I adored that book, so well done. Y'all got a great programming team there. So, like I said, got through a lot of sad stuff. There will be time for Q&A at the end if you want me to go into more detail with any of it. But I now want to move into the what can I do section. Whether you are a home gardener, whether you're just a bird enthusiast, if you live in an apartment complex or you have an HOA, what are the conversations that you can have? And so I want to give just some basic kind of high level overview tips of different things that you can do. Number one, and it sounds simple and it sounds like, well, of course I should be doing that. I am very guilty of not doing this all the time. I've gotten better since I got this job, but is actually just read the label. By federal law, everything that is sold as a pesticide has to have on it a label that discloses the active ingredient, which is the thing that is doing the killing or the repelling. It has to disclose any potential toxicity concerns. So whether it's particularly harmful to birds, whether it's harmful to mammals like pets, whether it needs to be kept away from eyes, it will have application instructions. So on certain insecticides or herbicides, it might say apply before dawn or only apply in the evening so that you try to avoid pollinating insects. It might say do not apply within 2 hours on either side of a rainstorm or a watering event because this chemical is really water soluble and can get carried away. So, my number one recommendation is read the label. And the National Pesticide Information Center, or NPIC, another terrible acronym, has a really great resource online which walks you through what the heck a label is saying. To be honest, pesticide companies, their number one goal is to sell product. And if they lead with saying, oh, well, here's all the dangerous stuff and here's the complicated way that you have to use it, they're not going to move a lot of stuff. Think about it like the medication commercials where it opens with, two people getting coffee and somebody gives a recommendation and then there's like a 10-minute voiceover of all the potential harmful side effects because they're trying to bury it. That's the way that pesticide companies are typically designing products for us to use. They want them to look pretty, they want them to look effective, and they want to bury all the complicated information. But it is there. And sometimes just reading the label and understanding that, I've got a really bad infestation of Japanese beetles in my garden. I need to use something that's heavy duty because all the homeopathic stuff hasn't worked. Make sure that you're using the chemical correctly. It'll even tell you how much or how little to use. Anyone who's done laundry knows that we love to overuse stuff when it's in a big old jug. And when you actually read it, you're like, oh, I'm only supposed to use 2 capfuls. Same thing with pesticides. So, number one place to start. With herbicides, we tend to reach for the conventional. We love the stuff that can be shaken out. We love the stuff that can be sprayed out of a backpack sprayer. I'd encourage you to look at alternatives, especially in a home setup or a small garden setup. For those really pesky sidewalk weeds, I use boiling water. I just put a kettle on, I go outside and I pour that on the plantain or the dandelion that's coming up through the cracks in the sidewalk out front. You give, be careful. Kids don't try this without adult supervision. But it works really well because it kills the plant just like the chemical does. You wait an hour and you pull it up. Hand pull whenever you can with weeds. It also really helps to understand what's in your garden when you can get down and close. However, if there's stuff that, maybe you can't get down and hand pull, believe it or not, vinegar and dish soap diluted in water works just as well as a lot of the expensive herbicides that are out there. They basically work by blocking all the chlorophyll pores in a plant's leaf, prevents them from being able to absorb sunlight. And in some cases, they'll even suck it up into their xylem or their phloem rather, and kill the plant from the inside. And the best part with vinegar and dish soap, and also with the essential oil derived products, is there's not a ton of kind of chemical hangover in the environment. They're pretty harmless once they get washed off of the plant that you're using them on. Mosquito control is another big one that comes up, especially in southern areas, especially places that are very damp. We love to, call the local mosquito fogger to come out and treat our yard multiple times. Depending on where you are, first, always, always, always prioritize human health. If you're in an area with a disease vector species in it, definitely pay attention to that. But one easy way to keep out mosquitoes is just giving them nowhere to reproduce. So go out, make sure you don't have standing water anywhere, replace bird baths pretty frequently, plastic toys in your yard. There's also really great, more natural options like mosquito dunks, which is the weird looking thing on the right here. You just take a bucket, put some water, put some grass or some hay or straw in it, one of these mosquito dunks, they'll be attracted in, and then the larvae are killed so that they're not going to continue to reproduce. And after that, the active ingredient dissipates, becomes completely harmless stuff that you can just pour down the drain. With insecticides, again, we've got the conventional stuff. There are a lot of really interesting options out there. I'd say insecticides, if you go to even your local neighborhood hardware store or your big, Cargill or Tractor Supply, there are tons of options for non-synthetic chemical insecticides. There are insecticidal soaps, there's different neem oil concentrations, there's essential oils, there's stuff derived from lavender. I mean, it's crazy what's out there. Another thing you can do, especially on a small scale, always, if you can, I like to use native plants in my yard because they're built for this environment. They're built to withstand our temperatures, our drought conditions, most of the native insect predators that come through, and the pests and things like that. So they need less chemical attention. You can use certain species of non-native plant like marigolds. Marigolds are great, especially in a vegetable garden, because they will attract things like ladybird beetles, ladybugs, that will eat aphids and mites. They also have some nematode repelling properties to them, so they will keep nematodes out of your soil a lot better. And they're pretty, so they'll attract in pollinators as well. You can also use diatomaceous earth in some cases. And then with rodenticides, there's the stuff that you buy at the hardware store. One commercial product, I'm not giving it my official endorsement, so, nobody put this on TikTok or whatever, but there is a product called Rat X, which is pretty easily available. You can get it on Amazon. It works like a commercial anticoagulant rodent bait, but rather than causing any kind of internal damage to the organism, rather than loading it up with poison, it basically coats the inside of a rodent's stomach and tells them that they don't need to drink water, that they're perfectly hydrated. The mouse or the rat will die, and then it can be eaten by coyotes, it can be eaten by foxes, by vultures, and by hawks, and there's no poison in the rodent. It died of dehydration, and it's safe to eat. You can eat it if you'd like to. I'm not going to judge your life. Do what you need to. Snap traps are also a great alternative if you can stomach that. There are new products that are always hitting the line as well. And then raptors are great, wild raptors. But again, I'm not telling you to live, in perfect harmony with rats if that's not your jam. One thing I do want to hit on too is birds themselves can be really great pest control in certain situations. It's becoming very common practice for vineyards to put up tea perches like this one in the middle photo here that attracts in Coopers and Sharpshin hawks, Swainson's hawks, red tails that will scare away starlings, which are big grape predators. So birds keeping other birds away. There's been tons of studies done in California that found when you leave a little bit of native habitat or some native bushes next to berry farms, it'll bring in bluebirds and other aerial insectivores that will eat most of the pest insects. They'll take a few berries for themselves as well, but they eat way fewer than what you would lose from all of the insect pests. And then over on the right is just some more cool pictures of raptor perches being used in production agriculture. It's a great place for kestrels, hawks to hang out during the day, owls to hang out at night. And there are cases where that's been really effective rodent deterrent in some production agriculture setups. And then I've got kind of 5 basic tips just to round us out here. If you are wondering, okay, how do I start using fewer synthetic pesticides in my day-to-day life? First off, give yourself a break. It's great that you're wanting to learn more about this. And then assess your current practices. How am I using them? How am I applying synthetic pesticides? Am I always treating my vegetables? Am I immediately putting down baits inside of my house? If you are on a schedule, especially for mosquitoes, I would really assess whether or not you need to be. Most mosquito fogging companies, mosquito exterminators will come out and treat your yard and say, we need to be back here, the second of the month for the next 3 months. If you have mosquitoes in the area, okay, they can come and treat for them. But if you don't have any mosquitoes and you just have them coming out so consistently because they said so, maybe rethink it. Explore alternatives as your wallet and your time allow. Plant native as often as you can because they do the job themselves really well. And then my favorite, because I work in policy, is talk to your representative. And when I say representatives, I mean your city council, I mean your state senator, your state reps, your governor, your members of Congress, your senator, your House of Representatives member. We have resources at American Bird Conservancy that have scripts on exactly what to say. And just telling them, my name is Fred, my name is Melanie, I live in Bayer County. This is something that's important to me. I think that I'm really worried about bird populations and how pesticides are impacting them. I would like to know what you're going to do about it. I would like to see your office sponsor a bill, support a rule, help us write a measure that decreases the amount of toxins in the environment. And here's the crazy thing. People are like, well, that's just shouting into a void. Why would I talk to Congress? What are they going to do? It takes as few as 5 phone calls from constituents for something to be considered a hot button issue in a federal congressional office. 5 phone calls, 5 people that call and say, this is important to me, and the staffers will flag it to their members of Congress. I go there all the time. They're sick of hearing me yakking about birds and pesticides. They need to hear from you. Your governor needs to hear from you. They need to know that this is something important to the people that they represent. And again, we can help with that. It's literally my day job. And then the last thing I wanted to do is just share about, getting away from pesticides. What do I know? This is something I've actually been implementing in my own life. So that's not my house. That's my neighbor's house. My house is, you'll see it in a second. But this is our front yard, half of our front yard. It's just this patch of grass. And in spring 2023, I wanted to start seeing what happened if we didn't use any chemicals and I stopped mowing. I wanted to turn it back into a native prairie. Guess what? Grass makes grass. So we got a lot of grass. And so I started to supplement it with a couple of native plants that we bought. We have a little free library. And you see the sign there? I got that on somewhere on the internet. It was like $15. I have to give huge credit to the love of my life and my biggest supporter and best friend, my wife, Amanda. My home office that I'm in right now, I look straight out over top of our driveway. I can see this little patch of prairie or meadow that we have. And before the sign, people were walking by and they'd say, oh, this looks terrible. What are they doing? Oh my God, they forgot to mow. There goes the neighborhood. I told my wife this, and like, I'm trying to make a pollinator habitat. People don't like it. And she said, well, people just need to be told. People need to understand. And she suggested I get a sign. I swear to goodness, overnight, I put up this sign. The next day, people are walking by. Oh, that's great. Oh, they're helping the butterflies. Oh, honey, we should do this. That's all it took. Sometimes just letting people know what you're working on is really helpful. So in fall of 2024, started to see some stuff coming back. I was still getting the hang of it. And then these pictures I took this morning. This is what it's starting to look like now. I also built us a new little free library, same sign as you can see. And we have tons of new plants coming in. And what's been great is not just that with using only non-synthetics and no chemicals most of the time and planting native. I love seeing all the plants come up, but I love the wildlife. I am in a suburban hellscape in central Ohio. Let me tell you, I am on 0.17 acres and surrounded by a lot of other yards that use a lot of synthetic chemicals. But this is what we started to see. We got all of these beautiful insects I'd never seen before. My wife is a big participant in Monarch Watch and Monarch way stations. So we started getting all these monarch caterpillars coming through. Rabbits, ducks will hang out. We've had deer leave their babies in the tall grass that we have in the front yard for the day. We had a little bee hanging out on Culver's root. It's been so great. And I just really want to let you know, just by being here tonight, you're already doing a lot. So please give yourselves a pat on the back. But do know that every action and every acre counts. Every time that you decide not to use a chemical, that you talk to your neighbor about it, that you choose a native plant, that you let your representatives know what's happening, you're making a difference for birds. You're making the world more biodiverse and less toxic, and we can't do it without you. So thank you so much. That is the end of my formal presentation. And if we have time for questions, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, I'll make my slides available. But uh, the three of you I can see are absolutely, such a wonderful audience. So I hope everyone else is still listening and not just eating crackers. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, it's pretty hearty that you've gotten everybody excited about. You have a wonderful sense of humor in all of this,
Thank
and I
you.
think we did have fun with pesticides tonight. Uh,
Good. As long as
we
you're not
do
asleep, it's been a great day for me. That's all I have to say.
some questions from the people here in the room and then on the chat. So
Yeah.
I have to run around with my little microphone.
Okay.
You can't see me do that, I hope. But do we have some on the chat? That we have one here in the front row. Here's Paul.
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Um, we have done a pretty fair amount wildscaping our yard, but there's this nagging little thing in the back of my head that one day some zoning person is going to come along and just give us hell for that.
Sure.
See, it sounds like you're in the same sort of situation. Have you had any experience with that?
I have. Excellent question, sir. So look at typically it's your town, your township, your village, whatever your smallest level of government is around you. They will have something up about how you can landscape. So for instance, the city that I live in, city of Westerville, Ohio, says that your grass can be no taller than 7 inches. That is a municipal code. So what you can do is either try to change it if people do start giving you hell about it, like you were saying. The other thing you can say is, well, I'm not growing grass. This is a native habitat. These are plants that do not fall into the category of turf grasses, which is exactly what those regulations are built to do. They're not going around saying your rose bushes are too big or your orange tree is unruly or there's too many cucumbers. They're looking for lawn height. And so what you can say is, well, I'm not growing turf grass. This is a native prairie, native meadow. These are native plants, and therefore that ordinance doesn't apply here. Now, you can also slash their tires, but you didn't hear that from me. So it is certainly something that has come up. I get worrying about it, but like I said, with that little sign, sometimes just letting people know what you're doing is enough. And if that doesn't work, I also have resources about how to change municipal codes that I can send you. So we got you covered either way.
Great, great answer, because some just putting up a sign that says I'm doing this, I'm using native plants. People do react to that.
Yeah.
They can see it's intentional, but you certainly don't want the vacant lot look. You want to
Yeah,
show them mow a path or do something that says
precisely.
somebody is taking care of it. It's just not going to be following the pattern that maybe other people like, or
Yeah.
whatever. So there's a lot of things you can ooch around those little yard Nazis. Yeah, I shouldn't call them that, but that's sometimes the way they act.
Love it.
Yes, sir.
So, on rodenticides, which are a real problem in large urban areas like what we
Yes,
have
sir.
here, have you heard of a type of rodenticide that is actually like a birth control mechanism that renders the rats sterile
Yes.
and reduces and eventually decimates the population that way? And
Yeah,
is that,
great,
if you
great.
have heard of it, is it safe?
Yeah, really great question. Thank you. It is safe from an ecological perspective. The largest deployment of that you could say there's been two big ones that have been done, which are in San Francisco and urban parts of Chicago. They have en masse deployed rodent birth control, where usually again it's a laced bait that they will deploy across the city, put in places where typically rats usually are hanging out, and it interrupts the female's reproductive cycle, and it prevents her from being able to have babies. It is effective in the large test sites that they've done. It hasn't had that big a measurable impact on the mice and rats that are there. However, that's probably because if you're tackling something like even a big neighborhood, you would have to deploy so much of it that you could interrupt the rodent life cycle. And they're able to reproduce. I mean, a female rat can give birth to her own babies at, I think it's something like 72 days old or something crazy. However, in smaller areas where it's been like they've done it on isolated farms or neighborhoods that are surrounded by fields and forests, so basically isolated populations where you don't have a lot of other mice and rats coming in those cases, it has measurably reduced the rodent pressure to a point where, snap traps did the job and you didn't even need to think about the anticoagulant. So it's definitely an option. It's not going to be something that we're going to be able to use at scale for a very, very long time, unfortunately. The one other thing I'll say about rodenticides is there's a there's people working on a new type of chemical for feral hog control, actually, that is sodium based, sodium nitrite based. And similar to that Rat X product I was talking about, they found that after a mammal consumes it, even to a lethal amount, it's not secondarily lethal. So it won't kill whatever eats that mammal that's died. That hasn't been adapted yet for rodent control. They're only using it for hogs right now, but I'm hopeful that that's kind of the next big leap forward that'll happen.
Good question. Okay. You
My question is roaches in
Yeah,
my state. We are just, I mean, we here in San Antonio, it's a big problem in
sure.
our residential area. So what do you do to prevent them? Because they're really nasty when they get into your house.
Yes, yes, they absolutely are. I had a roommate that was like that as well. Um, I'll say the first thing with roaches and really any common indoor pests, so roaches, bed bugs, certain types of ant and things that are typically found indoors, there's a lot of non-synthetic products on the market. However, there are very few cases, there's almost no evidence that if you're using, um, a neonicotinoid cockroach bait inside your house or cockroach killer inside your house, that it's affecting the wildlife outside. Typically, the inside bugs stay inside. So even in states that have passed laws banning neonicotinoid insecticides or chlorpyrifos insecticides, they exempt indoor uses. So they say you can still use these for bed bugs and whatnot because there's almost no chance of them getting to the outside world. So in terms of prevention, I'm not passing a judgment. I'm just saying what I've been told. It's usually to do with them having access to food and suitable habitat for them. So that could mean making sure that areas are very clean and that there's holes and things that are plugged going inside outside. Same thing goes for mice and rats. But don't be afraid to use, if you're worried about wildlife, I should say, don't be as afraid to use the synthetics on the indoor stuff. Again, everything has risks, but in terms of prevention, You can also call your local extension agency, so your local, University of Texas office that has an extensionist. They not only do ag stuff, they'll also do indoor pest control too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Or you can move out of Houston.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about some botanical chemicals that are equivalent to pesticide that we have.
Yes.
Even though Nandina domestica has been planted all over the United States, we have just a horrible problem here in San Antonio where landscapers have deliberately planted it
Oh
for
yeah.
customers who said they don't want deer in their yard, knowing that it would kill the deer.
Yep.
And so, and that's of course a big concern for the birds too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's the best thing I would say is in the areas that you are able to control, whether it's your yard, a park that you volunteer in, don't go under cover of dark and ruin your neighbor's landscaping or anything like that. Try to remove as much of that as possible and replace it with native stuff. In Ohio, our big struggle is we get hogweed, we get a lot of honeysuckle that chokes everything else out, and calorie pears are all over the place. So I don't have a great answer from that other than remove it as often as you can. And with some synthetic herbicides, glyphosate is one that's very controversial right now, Roundup. It is a very commonly used conservation, if you will, chemical. So people that are doing habitat restoration where they're removing invasive plants will directly apply a very small amount of herbicide to the stump of a tree or a bush that they don't want to come back. And as long as it's a small amount not applied during rainstorms, it's not really going to go anywhere. It gets absorbed very quickly. And use PPE while you're using it, but it can be very effective when used correctly by a trained person. So I know put a big asterisk on Roundup and glyphosate and say when we talk about it in big production agriculture, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, here it's invasive because they come back. But if you
Yeah.
use that to keep it, it's like Houston and the Gulf Coast having the Chinese tallow. They'll
Yeah.
come back, and you have to poison them on the stump to keep them from coming back. So we're talking about local use, not widespread
Precisely.
use. Is that right? Okay. Any questions in the chat that Tom?
I've got one here from Dawn Bernhard that says, how do fertilizers affect birds? I can hit that one real quick. And a great question, how do fertilizers affect birds? The biggest impact I would say fertilizers have is when they run off into local waterways like ponds and rivers and streams. Fertilizers are meant to make plants fertile. They're meant to make them grow really quickly. So what will usually happen is they will start to let algae grow at a really, really rapid rate. Sometimes it'll be an invasive plant species like duckweed or water hyacinth in a lot of parts of the U.S. And the plants will grow so rapidly that they will deoxygenate the water and kill all the other stuff that's living in it. So that might be insects that would typically be able to reproduce in the water, lay their eggs, feed, whatever it is there that birds rely on. That might kill fish populations that osprey and certain types of owls will rely on. So the direct impacts from fertilizer aren't necessarily something to worry about. There are a lot of products, though, that will combine an insecticide or an herbicide with a fertilizer. So it'll be, weed and feed. If you ever heard weed and feed, that's what it is. It's a fertilizer mixed with an herbicide. Typically, those two things together, if they are directly eaten by a bird, can be toxic to them. But the bigger issue is kind of those downstream effects, or especially when fertilizer gets into waterways. So it's a little bit more of a journey, but really great question, Don.
Are there others you can see there in the?
There's not
No?
really any.
Okay. Okay.
Mostly
Well,
just
I think we all go away with a lot more information about what we should be doing. It's like reading the labels. So if you can't see it, put your
Yeah.
glasses on and put it in really small letters so you can't read it 50 feet away. And I want to do a shameless plug for American Bird Conservancy.
Oh, thank
because
you.
it's an organization well worth our support. If you go on their website, they have threats and solutions. We had Grant Sizemore talk about, cats indoors and so forth. Anything that is threatening birds, they've got some bird strikes and everything. They've done a lot of research. They've got a lot of good people working on it. So check it out. You can educate yourself just reading the website. So consider that when you're considering your contributions to organizations, because it's a great one and one we should support. Yes, and if you're traveling, look for a sign that says ABC is helping to conserve birds here. That's how we found out about them. We were in Peru and we went to see this spatula tail hummingbird, had a big sign up there. Well, these birds are cool. And it says ABC is working with, the grassroots people there in Peru. And we thought, well, we ought to check out this American Bird Conservancy. And the more we learn about it, the more we're impressed with them.
Oh,
So,
thank you. I'll also plug on our website. Thank you. We have a lot of action alerts or opportunities where click here to send a message to your representative. We have those on microplastics, funding for bird conservation, pesticides, public lands. Pants should have more pockets, whatever you want. I bet we've got an action alert on it. So yeah, check that out too. That's in the take action section.
Yeah, you can really do a lot. Wait. Get microphone so other people can hear. Yeah.
Did you say that you have individuals working on the impact of windmills on birds?
We do.
Please give us their name.
I will very gladly. His name's Lewis Grove. He's great. I'll make sure you guys have
Check
his
out the
contact.
website. It'll be on there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Citing them. It's location mainly. We're not
Yeah.
against wind turbines. We just want them in the right place.
Right.
So before, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you all so much for letting me spend some time with you this evening. I'll have to come down soon and we can all go bird together.
Oh, you come down here and we'll take you out and